Planning to check out San Diego Comic-Con this summer? Come join Alex Marcus and Amanda Rivas of the Pop Break Podcasting Network for a family-friendly bracket-style debate panel on the best pop culture vacation destinations. Alex, Amanda, and their all-star panel of podcasters and cosplayers debate the amenities, tourist sites, and best street food from your favorite pop culture locales. Would you rather have a romantic weekend getaway on Paradise Island, a ski trip at the Fortress of Solitude, an architectural tour through downtown Wakanda? Come join in on the fun and find out what the panel has to say. The Pop Break presents the best pop culture vacation destinations will be held on Sunday, July 26th at 1 p.m. at the Neil Morgan Auditorium of the San Diego Central Library. Event is restricted to authorized San Diego Comic-Con badge holders. See you there. It's been over a decade since my comic shop closed, but if there's one place where I feel the same sense of camaraderie, it's Fat Moose Comics, the Garden State's best and oldest comic book store, led by current owner Sean Hendricks. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany, New Jersey, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Moose is also home to our main man, Justin DeVoe, who is taking you inside his world of collecting and cosplay on his YouTube channel, Tannelier's Basement. Subscribe today. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the Justice League of America run by Brad Meltzer and Ed Benes on its 20th anniversary is one of the hosts of the Comic Binge, returning guest Chris Clow. Welcome back.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Anthony. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. You were here a while back. We did a 20th anniversary discussion of DC: The New Frontier, so you're my 20th anniversary guy, it seems.
Hey, it works though. I mean, because this is the era that I really jumped into being a full-on comic book fan. So I appreciate the chance to reminisce. The time bothers me a little bit, but it doesn't bother me that much. So, it's just the nature of things, I guess.
I'm with you. And once again, we are in that post-Infinite Crisis territory that I know is a bit of a sweet spot for the both of us. We've talked about other stories in that same time period, so I'm happy to be back here again with you. I guess before we get to this Meltzer run specifically, let me just ask you about your Justice League fandom generally. I think we're just about the same age. For me, Morrison's JLA was so formative to me and still remains the high watermark for me in terms of what I look for out of Justice League stories. I'm curious what your experience was, if it lines up, if it differs.
I mean, when it comes to my conception of the team as I know it and like the primacy that the team usually has, yes, it is I remember picking up Grant Morrison's JLA #1 in a gas station the summer that Batman and Robin was in theaters. And it felt so large and it felt so important when it comes to just like assembling the team. And I didn't know this as a 9-year-old at the time, but it was bringing the at least members of the original 7 back together, even though there were different members of the various mantles. But yeah, that book in terms of comics absolutely has a lot of real estate in my head when it comes to the team. But I've really loved the team since, gosh, I honestly can't remember a time in my life without the Justice League. And I think it's primarily because of Super Friends reruns. Batman was my guy as a kid in the early 90s. Like he was everybody's guy in the early 90s pretty much. And, everything that was happening with the death of Superman was really captivating. And that story I credit with unlocking like emotional depth and weight in my mind for reading comic book stories. And the League had a pretty notable presence, a smattering of presences across the death and return of Superman. And my brother was really into the books at that time, so he would bring those home. And whenever I saw the team, it was always like, it was a big moment. When Batman stops the bomber at the funeral, for instance, that's a moment that sticks out a lot in my head. It was really my first exposure to Wonder Woman, but those Super Friends cartoons really gave me like this all-star kind of conception of the team before I had gotten way back into the comics. And then of course the animated series. It's really hard to divorce perceptions of the Justice League from the animated series these days. And it's funny, like when I was working as a retailer before the first Avengers movie came out, I remember someone coming in and it was like, "What's the Avengers?" And I was like, "Oh, the Avengers is like a lot of the big heavy hitters at Marvel right now. Wolverine and Spider-Man are part of them. That's kind of new, but it's got like Captain America and Iron Man and Thor." And he's like, "Oh, so it's like Marvel's Justice League." And I said, "Yes, exactly. It's like Marvel's Justice League." Uh, Now the shoe is on the other foot, but the League to me is just the purest, most uh, fun, most adventurous, but also most, and I know this word is overused so much, and I shudder to say it now, but it really, I think, is applicable. The most epic superhero team, in the truest sense of the word when it comes to comic book storytelling. The various rosters I have a lot of affection for from different eras, whether I was reading them at the time or whether I absorbed them in the back issue bins. It's such a great conduit for DC Universe creativity and pushes forward stories you can really only tell in that universe. In I think some of the best cases, one of which we're about to talk about.
Well said. No, I appreciate getting your history with the team. Yeah, like I said, I mean, I've been a fan. That Morrison run in particular was highly formative, but I remember coming out of Infinite Crisis and knowing that Meltzer and BENES were going to be relaunching the title because, of course, heading into Infinite Crisis, we had the end of the prior title, JLA. We had the destruction of the Watchtower by Superboy Prime. And we had this great fracture among the Trinity, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. And so now, at the start of this run, we have them coming back together. But I just remember the excitement that I felt with Infinite Crisis in and of itself, but then coming out of it, knowing we were getting this relaunch, knowing that it was Brad Meltzer. I was such a fan of his work in comics on Green Arrow, The Archer's Quest, and Identity Crisis. So I was really primed for this as it was hitting. Do you remember your feelings and your expectations heading into the launch of this in July 2006?
Oh, they were off the chart excited. I mean, I was one of those people that read Infinite Crisis with like a deeply embedded sense of tragedy because of what had happened to the League. It was so well layered, and it did imbue a sense of loss, and it imbued a sense of fear too. Because I mean, yeah, we know that the Justice League is going to get back together in DC Comics at some point, but the fracturing that they underwent in the lead up to and through Infinite Crisis was something that made me concerned for the state of that universe. Like, how long is it going to be until we get the League back? And what is it going to look like when it does finally reconstitute? And so as soon as this was solicited, I had a little bit of a sense of relief. And then going into it, my anticipation level was through the roof. I could not wait to see what the rationale would be, and they did a pretty good job of keeping what the final roster would be under wraps. And my expectations were that it would be the core seven, despite Aquaman being in kind of a weird place in 1 year later. I kind of thought that that would be a way to bring him into the fold and to make him become a part of the larger cosmology. Little did I know. That's a whole other podcast. But I really appreciated the fact that they went with Meltzer, that they went with BENES. BENES, I had really been exposed to because of his work in Superman with Mark Verheiden right around the Infinite Crisis time.
Yeah.
So I was primed for that, and it felt like an event book that was going to be coming out on a monthly scale, and my feelings on it have kind of evolved in the past 20 years, but at the time I was really into Identity Crisis. And so the idea of bringing Brad Meltzer to as the guy who broke the League to the guy putting it back together, that significance was not lost on me. So I was really, really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the note of Ed BENES, yeah, I've been a fan of his for a long time. We recently talked about his work on Supergirl, early DC work, Supergirl Many Happy Returns, and of course a great run on Birds of Prey, that Superman run, like you said, right up to Infinite Crisis. So yeah, to see him kind of step up with this with this assignment was fantastic. And it's funny, 20 years later, I feel like you might disagree, but I feel like the lasting legacy of this run is that wraparound cover to issue 1 by BENES with all of the heroes of the DCU lined up for potential membership. I feel like that is such an iconic, indelible image. If you search DCU heroes, I feel like that's one of the first things, rightfully so, that will come up. It's so iconic.
The poster was on my wall for years.
Nice.
Years. I wish I still had it because it might still be on my wall. But no, I can't. It's everything that the Justice League was, is, and could be in one image, and it's just like, here is the bench of people ready to fight the forces of evil in the DC universe. I love that image a lot. And yeah, it's hard to see that being replicated in any significant sense anytime soon.
Yeah, still holds up all these years later. So this run spanned issues 0 through 12. Issue 0 was our prologue. It was called Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. We had all of these various meetings across time, past, present, and future, featuring the Trinity as they're coming back together. Then issues 1 through 7 comprise the Tornado's Path, featuring our resident android, Red Tornado, and his becoming human. But of course, it all goes awry. That's, I would say, the heart of this run here. Then the next few issues tie into the Lightning Saga, which was a crossover with Justice Society of America, written by Jeff Johns. And then we have a pair of standalone stories, Walls and Monitor Duty, to close us out here. So we'll talk about all of it. Now, in the past, you had joined me for a Legion-centric episode where we looked at the Lightning Saga as part of a larger discussion. So we won't go super hard on that, but we will touch on it, and we'll talk about the run as a whole. I guess what I'm really curious about, because I had a little bit of a mixed experience, to be honest, going back to it now. So overall, rereading it all these years later, how did the run hold up for you?
I think it holds up pretty well for me. And I think we might be flipping places a little bit. Because at the time I remember being a little disappointed is the wrong word, but I did feel like, well, why aren't we getting back to the core 7? Like, after everything the DC universe has gone through, this is the dawn after the darkness. Isn't that what we're supposed to get to? But the run really won me over with the stories that it chose to tell about a wider cast than I was expecting. And I do think that holds up, especially as far as Meltzer's intention goes, because really at the end of the day, I feel like what he's trying to say is that the Justice League is not any specific set of characters. This is supposed to be something that is a living, breathing embodiment of the DC universe at any given time. And some of the roster selections here are pretty inspired. I don't think that if I had a better understanding at the time of a book like Batman and the Outsiders, that I would have necessarily thought of a couple of members of that team graduating up to this level, and having something substantive to say, especially in the context of legacy that the Trinity provides. That's something that I really do appreciate and love about this run generally. Tornado's Path, I do, and we'll get into it, of course, but the end of Tornado's Path, I think, is the weakest part of the run for me, but it's kind of on a pretty solid upswing from there. I love the way Monitor Duty ends. The 0 issue, well, at the time I read it, and now I think it still holds up as a legitimately emotional reading experience for anybody that has an affinity for those 3 characters. And Walls knocked my socks off when it came out. And I was not expecting that. Maybe other people were, and maybe I should have, given the creative team. But, I certainly knew that it looked interesting based on previews and solicits that had come out. But man, that deserves every accolade that it has. So I see what you mean, I think. And I mean, I'll hear what the reasoning is, of course, but I understand it based on my own perspective that I had at the time that the books came out. But nowadays, I think I appreciate this as a bit of an outlier of a Justice League run, especially considering what the roster of the team has looked like over the past 15 years in particular. and as a statement about the variety of stories and characters that you can get in the DC universe.
Yeah, I'd say overall, I think we are pretty similarly aligned. And I think the positives that I'm going to lay out here outweigh any misgivings that I have. I think where this really works for me, always has and continues to work, is to your point, how Meltzer really makes, I think, a very powerful statement about the idea of the Justice League and how it's bigger than any one configuration, like you said. And the fact that we start this with the Trinity coming together in the Batcave to vote on potential members. And while all of this is going on, forces are in play that are bringing what will be our new Justice League together. So I really appreciated that. Meltzer, just like he had done with his prior DC work, very effectively mined DC history, specifically the Bronze Age, which is clearly a huge influence for him. And it's one of those things where back in the day, I certainly had read very little Bronze Age DC. I've read more now, but still not a ton, and exceedingly little of the Justice League stories specifically that he was pulling from. But I think like any good story that uses continuity well, I didn't feel lost. Like I felt like there was this rich tapestry that he was accessing. Even if I didn't know all of the particulars, the effect was still the same. So I really appreciated that as well. Once again, like with his prior work, Meltzer does such a great job of making these larger than life characters feel like real people who exist in a community together. And the character work that we see in the dynamic among the Trinity as they're voting, and in the graduation essentially of Roy Harper from Arsenal to Red Arrow, and the bonds that he has with Black Canary and Hal Jordan, all of that. The fact that Black Lightning is trading on his affiliation with Lex Luthor when he served as part of Lex's cabinet in order to extract information from the criminal underworld. All of that I thought was absolutely terrific. I think where I wanted to just get a little more out of it was with the Tornadoes path, where I wanted to feel for Reddy more than I ended up. And we'll get into more of the specifics of the story. But like I said a moment ago, he gets his wish of becoming human. His soul is placed in this human body. But of course, it turns out to be a villainous plot. But I just felt like we didn't really spend enough time with Reddy generally, and especially once he was in that human mode with his family. We get a little bit of him relishing this newfound life, but we're so quickly thrust into the villainous plot of the arc that I don't know, I just didn't really feel as invested as I wanted to. And yeah, even when we get to the end, pretty traumatic battle that he's put through, but coming out of it, I don't know exactly what I would have wanted to see, but as far as kind of following him through the other side of it, I just didn't feel like we really got enough for me to sink my teeth into. So I guess in that respect, it let me down a little bit in terms of what I had remembered of the story and what I wanted to get out of it. But overall, there was enough about this that works, and still a run that I would hold up.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think if there's an issue that I could identify with the way Red Tornado is used, is that it's just, this is a story that on paper is wildly ambitious in terms of trying to serve as like a satisfying homecoming for people that have been with the DCU for a while also being an accessible beginning. You know, it's inextricably linked to the arc of the DCU since Identity Crisis, and all of the, you know, various machinations that we saw during that time. But you know, it's a zero and it's a one, and it's hard to make a broader statement than that about, hey, come aboard. This is a new story. Come see what's going on. Back in those days, the number ones were real big and said first issue underneath, you know. And that I remember just kind of getting people excited in our neck of the woods about, hey, the Justice League's back. This is a big deal. But then, you know, when it comes to the particulars of Red Tornado, Meltzer tries to do this and arguably succeeds a little bit more with other characters, like you saw probably most especially with the elongated man in Identity Crisis, someone who doesn't have an abundance of outside comics recognition, given this very humanistic entry point for people to try to latch onto. But yes, because there are so many characters to serve, and because the story is trying to set up not just Red Tornado's newfound humanity and new way of experiencing his humanity, but it's also giving service to Roy Harper and setting up Jefferson Pierce's backstory that he's using to infiltrate the underworld while Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman are determining what the next chapter of the Justice League is going to look like. I mean, that's a lot, you know? So if you're going to throw a story that ideally is designed to introduce Red Tornado to an entirely new generation of people while also substantively following up those that had paid attention to him, yeah, it's a lot to do. And I respect the hell out of Meltzer for giving it a try. And I think he mostly lands it, but I can't disagree with you. You don't spend a lot of time with him considering the fact that his name is on the story. And when you do spend time with him, you're arguably a little bit distracted by everything going on around him to really focus all that much attention on it.
And I think that's the thing. I feel like my memory, and like you said, just the title of it, The Tornado's Path, I think I just had this false expectation of really following his point of view for much more of the story than we actually do. So I think this was an instance of my memory / expectations not quite lining up with the reality. But building off of what you were saying, yeah, I really do appreciate that Meltzer broadened out the lineup generally, and that he did center this first story around a Red Tornado. It's interesting, you mentioned Elongated Man and Identity Crisis, because I was thinking that too, because that's another instance where I didn't have a ton of history with that character at the time, yet I really found myself pulled in immediately in that story. So I think it just worked to greater effect there than it did here necessarily. We can double back to the Zero issue, but let's just stay on the Tornado's Path here, if that's cool with you. So at the start of this, we have Red Tornado's wife, Kathy, with Dr. Magnus from the Metal Men, eagerly awaiting the return of Red Tornado's soul into his android body. Because as we learn, anytime he's been destroyed, and it's happened, what do they say, 7 times? Whenever it happens, once all of the pieces are assembled, his soul will make its way back. But he's been reassembled and his soul hasn't returned. And so this is a source of confusion and concern. But then we find out that on the spiritual plane, the soul of Red Tornado is there with Deadman. It appears to be Deadman. What we'll find out later in the story is that it's Felix Faust, and he's working for our ultimate villain of the piece. Spoiler alert, a smart, reborn Solomon Grundy. We'll get into that more as well. And with quote unquote Deadman's help, Red Tornado is able to inhabit the deceased duplicate body of Multiple Man. So it's a body that no one will miss. He's not usurping someone else's form or anything like that. And so this is Pinocchio, the boy made real. Like, he gets his wish to actually be human and also retain his powers. So it really seems like a win-win-win here. So that's kind of our setup on the Red Tornado front. And then I would say there are a few main tracks that we're following here in the story. One is, as I was mentioning before, we have the Trinity here in the Batcave voting on who's going to be in this rebuilt Justice League. We also have Black Lightning, who's investigating the disappearances of these D-list villains, Plastique, Executioner, Trident, and Dr. Impossible. We'll find out ultimately they're under the control of Solomon Grundy. And then you have Dinah, Hal, and Roy, who are investigating the theft of Red Tornado's android body. And there's also the business with Vixen, who has been lured to this bar where she's attacked and her totem is stolen. So these are the various tracks that we're following that will ultimately converge as we get deeper into the Tornado's Path. But I guess let me ask you just from the jump, I want to drill down a little bit more on the Trinity and the voting and what you make of this and the dynamic amongst the three of them.
I was really taken with how playful it was, especially coming out of Infinite Crisis, and we've seen their relationship characterized in a playful way before. There's hints of that in Morrison's run, for instance, but there was something about the just the spirit of fun that was imbuing those characters. And I feel like that's a very conscious choice on the part of Meltzer to make a statement saying, this is not Identity Crisis. We are out of the woods of Infinite Crisis. They're on the other side of this horrific tragedy, and they're stronger for it. And the Zero issue sets up some of that, but in just as far as Tornado's path itself, um, part of my dissatisfaction at the time, I think I alluded to this before, was the fact that relatively speaking, like they have a pretty small part in the story, particularly in the first few issues, right? So, um, I might have been a little impatient on my first reading experience, and more Meltzer is giving me this journey with these characters that I don't know nearly as well, and I'm like, but I want to see the people that I know. But in terms of what we were given in those first few issues, I think they were in it just enough. And I appreciated the depth that he gave their banter. And the Zero issue plays no small part in establishing why they feel as strongly about each other as they do. And I mean, everybody knows the depth of their bond, but being reminded about what it's built on never goes amiss. And I feel like the Zero issue did a really effective job of front loading that stuff at the very, very beginning so that we could have a little bit more room to spend time with these other characters, some of whom we do know very well. It's hard to know Hal Jordan any better than members of the Trinity, for instance. So that stuff, that was probably what I was taken with the most was the stuff with Red Air, or sorry, at this time, Arsenal and Black Canary. But overall, the Trinity, I just really appreciate their characterization here. I appreciate the pragmatism that Batman presents for it, and also just like the good-natured belief in the institution of the team that Superman presents, and Wonder Woman is the glue that holds all of it together. It's such a unique dynamic that on paper really shouldn't work. But when you have a creative team that knows what makes these characters tick, knows what makes the Justice League special, it really does hit another level. And I feel like Meltzer more than succeeded in displaying their dynamic in a way that felt familiar to me, but also made me feel like maybe I'm learning something about this particular friendship between the three of them. It's not just like, as much as I love the world's finest heroes and seeing them spend time together, it's a whole other ballgame when Diana is in the mix with them, and they know it too. And I feel like this story did a good job of emphasizing that.
Yeah, man, 100%. Because there's a dynamic that exists among the three of them, but then each pair has its own dynamic. And there's the great bit where Batman Bruce has to take a call, and Clark and Diana take the opportunity to vote on him. But then you find out that Clark and Bruce had also voted on Diana. So yeah, I like how there are the dynamics within the pairs, but then a distinct dynamic that exists among the three of them. And I agree. I think the playfulness, it all felt very rooted in character. And what you find, and this is explicitly stated by the characters, like as they're voting, what's motivating each one of them. Like for Diana, it's all about tactics and strategy and who's going to be the most effective weapon for the team. Clark goes with who he likes, and Bruce goes with who he can trust / control. And all of that felt very true to their characters. So I appreciated all of that. And going back to what we were saying before about where they are now versus where they were at the start of Infinite Crisis, not to go too far afield, but it informs where they are now. I think one of the reasons why that fracture, to me at least, always worked was because I don't know that any one of them was totally right or wrong. I think you understood where they were coming from, and it got complicated and messy. I mean, Bruce was spying on everyone with Brother Eye. They were taking Clark to task for a perceived lack of action on his part. Wonder Woman had murdered Maxwell Lord after he was controlling Superman. And I think from each character's perspective, you can make an argument as to why they were right and the others were wrong, and vice versa. So it all felt like that fracture felt real. And then they're coming together again at the end of Infinite Crisis after everything they went through. That too felt earned. And now, of course, we're picking up after some time. We're in the 1 year later territory. So, all this I thought really worked nicely. And we circle back to the Zero issue here. I think this is a perfect place for it because what you find out is that this trio, they've been meeting every year since the formation of the League to sort of check in. And this ties in with the larger idea that Meltzer plays with that I really, really like. It comes back around in the final issue, Monitor Duty, about the subgroups, right? Like the Trinity meets, but Flash and Green Lantern would meet, and Aquaman and Martian Manhunter would, and that too felt very, like I'm saying, a real life community here. That felt very real. This podcast is sponsored in part by Rick Reason. No product pitch this time, no big sales campaign. Just a comic fan helping support a show he genuinely enjoys. Rick believes comics matter because stories matter, especially ones about hope, grief, second chances, and trying to be better than you were yesterday. Follow Rick Reason on Facebook for comics, humor, life reflections, and the occasional third shift existential crisis. Ever wonder what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? That's exactly what Robbo is doing on This Podcast Will Never Die, which starts with all the ways the Man of Steel stood out on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics, many of them starring the Man of Steel, Logan's favorite character. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at Single Bound Podcast. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. That Zero issue is still such a good reading experience for me. Not only is it just a tour de force of a lot of the prominent artistic talent that was around in DC at the time, but just the character focus. I really appreciated the additional context that's given to some of those classic stories, in addition to taking the pains to render the different eras in appropriate artistic accoutrements and coloring and even like line work, and they put the color dots in certain pages.
Yeah.
It's something that I really appreciate, just as an extension of the form and an acknowledgement of where we've been. It feels really celebratory in that sense, and it's something that I really do love. But then you get into the substance of the story itself, and reading it at the time was an emotional roller coaster, just because these three characters are probably my favorite characters in all of comics. So I'm going to feel particularly strongly about that. It's giving us different perspectives on these really celebrated stories and works of merit in the DCU that we've seen before, while also teeing things up. And that made this eminently fascinating to me. Even though all of those threads were not ultimately followed upon, they were still fun threads, and they served the purpose of the issue itself in showing just like a different conception and angle of their bond. But I really credit that Zero issue with giving me a far better understanding of what the dynamic is when the three of them are together, and how they can break apart in different branches between the three of them, and it's still a very strong bond built on a very strong foundation. This issue and Matt Wagner's work on Trinity are probably some of my absolute favorites when it comes to featuring these three characters specifically. And if you're really wanted to just take a crash course in what makes the Trinity special and what makes them unique as far as a unit that operates within the realm of superhero comics, you could do way worse than reading Justice League of America #0.
Yeah, 100%. And it's an artist jam issue. So you have that varied visual component as well. And yeah, we're checking in with the Trinity across the history of the DC universe, or at least the history of the Justice League. And so half the issue is with these past set vignettes. And so you see them meeting after the initial formation of the League, after, I guess, the first death of Red Tornado, after the formation of Justice League Detroit, after the events of Tower of Babel, and we had that drawn by Howard Porter. So, that was really in the pocket for me. Really love that. I'm sure I'm probably missing a couple off the top of my head, but so you get to to revisit these key moments in Justice League history. But then, to your point, you also have all of these future set vignettes. And yeah, some would come to pass in some way, shape, or form. Others wouldn't. I mean, one of them shows Diana and Bruce there for Clark after the passing of Jonathan Kent. And not too long from this point in the Action Comics run by Jeff Johns, we would have the passing of Jonathan. And this was the one moment in this run that really made me tear up when they're there for Clark in his bedroom, and he's been filling in the tunnel underneath the Kent farm. And he just has this, when he talks to Bruce, he's like, this is what you've had to live with, like this feeling of loss and grief. You're all this time like that, that really hit me. So something like that would come to pass. Meltzer was clearly playing on aspects of the Dark Knight Returns universe. We had sort of glimpses into that. The one that never came to pass that I was most intrigued by, probably not too surprising, and it's just a single splash page, but Lex Luthor fighting the Trinity, and he's got his kryptonite ring, and he's just shouting, "He was my son." And it's like, whoa, what was the plan there? I mean, and I guess that's the thing. It's not necessarily that there was a plan for this. I think these were ideas, and maybe some came to fruition and some didn't. Maybe there was an intention behind some of them. Others, it was just like, hey, we'll put this out here and maybe someone will run with it or not. I'm curious if, for that one in particular, any theories on what you think that might have pointed to or what you would have wanted to see? I mean, obviously we're coming out of Infinite Crisis and the death of Connor Kent, so it just could have been something along those lines.
Yeah, that was immediately what I thought of, was that it had to do with Connor, because one of the things that I really appreciated about, and not to go off on too much of a tangent, but the Teen Titans the Teen Titans annual issue that really spotlighted Lex's feelings about Connor and how weird and complicated they are, and a little bit twisted, but in his own way, he does seem to love him. In a very, narrow, myopic, and Lex Luthor kind of way that's all tied up in his own identity. But it would have been interesting to me because it would be a while before Connor would come back into the fold. So I immediately pegged that as like, okay, now he actually, we're seeing a semblance of his grief following the death of Connor. Because really, now that we have full on hindsight, we never really got to see what his own personal reaction was to Connor's death. So that's what jumped out at me immediately. And I would have liked to have seen that as someone who loves Connor as much as I do. But swing and a miss, I guess. But it was a cool page.
It was. I think my favorite future moment, though, and this ties in with that playfulness and that banter that we were talking about, is when they're at the wedding of Hal Jordan. And there's this talk about a pool among the superhero community about who's going to be the last to get married. And Clark is like, oh, people are betting money. And Diana's like, oh, Clark. And then Bruce goes, please don't let him fool you. Who do you think won? And then you get this great shot of Clark. And it's like, yes, once again, that just felt so real, so true to life, so true to these characters. And yeah, just kind of seeing them relating to one another in a way that you don't always get to see. So that in particular really jumped out at me and made me laugh.
Oh, yeah, me too. And arguably you could say, well, that never actually happened, but it was hinted that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
At the tail end of Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run, basically said that they do end up getting married. So who's to say? It could still be something that actually specifically takes place.
Yeah. So I guess segueing back into the meat of Tornado's path. So like I said before, we have Black Lightning investigating the disappearances of these villains. I wanted to ask you your thoughts on Dr. Impossible, one of these villains who goes missing, who ends up being one of these agents of Solomon Grundy, because he claims to be the brother of Mr. Miracle and to use a father box, which generates a hush tube rather than a boom tube. Yet one of the other characters, I think the one who's feeding information to Black Lightning, if I'm not mistaken, is like, no, like he's just a former goon of the Penguin who got his hands on some tech. And I looked this character up. I know he does come back later in this series. I think it's when James Robinson is writing the title. I never made my way through all of his issues. So I think he does come back. I know there's an Earth 2 version of Dr. Impossible who ends up being revealed to be Jimmy Olsen, but that's Earth 2 specifically. So in the mainline DCU, to my knowledge, we never got an answer as to who the hell this guy was. Does that line up with your understanding?
Absolutely. As far as I know, in terms of the character's appearances in the post-Infinite Crisis, pre-New 52 era, this was it. And pre-DCU stuff, I had heard his name a few times, but I don't think I could tell you exactly when, or, like you had referred to him before as a D-lister, and that coincides and aligns with my understanding of who he was. I love his design. I think that
Yeah.
his visual look is really, really good. Um, but at the end of the day, do I have like an abundance of perspective about what makes him tick, and if he has like a special contribution to the story outside of being a pawn for other people to move around? Not really, but it was a welcome addition, and I certainly loved how he looked.
Yeah, no, I don't know that there's much perspective one could have. Maybe he was used
Yeah.
so fleetingly, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's some untapped potential here. I'm not gonna take up the Justice for Doctor Impossible campaign. I've got enough of those going on, but nevertheless, I still think there's some some potential out there to capitalize on.
Oh, it's got like kind of a Mr. Sinister kind of vibe with his cape, but he's also, just like totally rooted in darkness. There's got to be something there. People have created great stories on less.
Yeah, well, and especially obviously Mr. Miracle's profile has risen in recent years with the Tom King maxi series and now the
Yeah.
forthcoming animated series. So as a sort of counterpart, bizarro version of Mr. Miracle, it's like, oh, there might be a spot for this guy. I don't know. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on him.
Definitely.
But like I said, I love how Black Lightning is making the most out of him having served in Lex's cabinet. And he talks about how if I show up as Black Lightning, like they'll try to take my head off, but but when I show up in a suit and tie, they associate me with Lex and think that I can pass on information to Lex or whatever the case may be. So I appreciated that bit of business. And ultimately, Black Lightning follows a lead that takes him to the Parasite, because it turns out when these villains and others, I suppose, when they need to get past sensors or what have you, instances where their powers can be detected, Parasite will siphon them off for a certain amount of time to allow them to pass undetected. So that's where Black Lightning follows this lead. But then we have Trident and Dr. Impossible show up to take Parasite, and Black Lightning is able to subdue Trident. More on him later, because that will tee up the Lightning Saga. But it's at this point that Hawkgirl enters the picture here and links up with Black Lightning. And they find that on the back of Trident's neck is a mini Starro, which will then lead them to the Batcave. And that's where we have our first pairing now converge here. And they'll trace the signal back to the Rockies and the hideout of Solomon Grundy. Anything else kind of on that Black Lightning front that you wanted to talk about?
This is the story that I credit with really making me fall in love with Jefferson Pierce as a character, because it's not, I didn't exactly go out of my way to read Black Lightning issues or Black Lightning back issues. I had read a fair amount of the original issues of Batman and the Outsiders, and I liked what his powers brought to the table, and I love his original design, and I really love his design in this series. I think it's a really cool modernization of what we've seen before. And he's the kind of guy I really do feel once you get in the groove of this story, he's exactly the kind of person that you would want on your team. Not only does he have the intelligence to leverage those connections that he might be a little bit of ashamed of these days to further the mission of what would become the Justice League, but he's just got an assuredness about him that I really appreciate, and this no nonsense approach that feels a little bit more grounded than someone like Batman's no nonsense approach. Batman has an understandably very focused sense of what he's trying to accomplish for the rest of the team, but you could tell Black Lightning appreciates the camaraderie that the league brings, and it's a confidence that comes from a belief in what everybody can do. Like he feels, I don't mean to trivialize him when I say this, but he does feel like a cheerleader on the team, because of just his place overall and his own confidence that he brings to the table. It just elevates everybody. So he got to do some really interesting things in this story that you might not expect. Like there's a subterfuge element that if you describe it to someone who hasn't read it, it might feel a little bit out of place. But there's just something about him. He's got a charisma that's really well emphasized in the writing and in Ed Benes's lines here.
Yeah, right on. I agree. And then, of course, we also have this track with Dinah, Hal, and Roy. And what I liked, a lot that I liked about this, one is that when Hal and Roy are hanging out, and then Hal gets the call from Dinah that Kathy's concerned, Red Tornado hasn't returned yet, Hal has this moment where he's about to make this excuse to leave Roy. And then he stops himself and he's like, hey, like, do you want to come with us? So I really appreciated that. And through Roy's narration, he talks about how Ollie taught him to be tough. Dinah taught him how to fight. Hal taught him to be unafraid. And so, you see these three parental figures and the impact that they had on him. And when we get deeper into the story, is I thought a really poignant moment where there's an acknowledgement that when Roy was at his lowest, dealing with his drug addiction, the hard traveling heroes turned their back on him, kicked him out, left him. And the one who was there to take him in and help him in his darkest hour, his moment of need, was Dinah. And so when he does step up as Red Arrow and assumes this new mantle, it's her victory more than those other two guys. So once again, like, I think a great mining of the history, and but I just love this, and all the fun bits where they're on their way to search for Red Tornado, and Hal's got his construct of the target, and he keeps moving it farther and farther, and claiming that's what Ollie hit. All that back and forth I thought was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's impossible to ignore the connection with the legacy of the Titans here. And DC at this time was really into the legacy elements of the mantle. It was really only kind of starting to arguably to be undone by this point in time, because we're getting away from Kyle Rayner leading the Green Lantern books and Wally West leading the Flash books and so on and so forth. But and I wasn't one of these people, but I can imagine if you were one of the people who were reading New Teen Titans while it was coming out, and maybe you had seen some of the earlier adventures of Arsenal, there is a sense of justice that comes from Roy's elevation as part of the Justice League. And it's not properly characterized until we get on the other side of Tornado's path, but there is an element from Ollie himself where, yeah, he did turn his back. He said he called himself a crap mentor, I believe were his exact words. And there's an element of him trying to make up for that I think is, it's a very human kind of reaction. Everybody makes mistakes. Green Arrow arguably would say he has made more than some of his heroic counterparts, but seeing how Roy is treated here, honestly, I kind of blame this story for giving me a sense of Roy that gave me permission to feel like a sense of pride for him. And then what DC would end up doing with him a couple of years after this point was horrible. Mm-hmm. It was horrible. Yep. I was so shocked that he goes through what he goes through to reach this level as part of this story in this run. And to be part of this issue, this run's arguably most celebrated single issue, to then be dragged through the mud at the whim of a different creative team. Like, was he the right avatar for that? I don't think so. But all that to say that this story really did give me a sense of pride for Roy, that it was really fun to see, especially by the time he gets the costume. Just the sense of pride that Hal and Dinah so clearly feel when he puts it on for the first time. Ollie not being there seems weird, but then they pick that up right afterward in a way that I thought made a lot of sense and was really poignant. But I have a lot of feelings about Roy Harper in this story, especially considering the unfortunate hindsight that I have about what they would do with him later.
Oh, dude, it's like at some point I'm going to have to do something on Cry for Justice and where they take Roy. But it's like I keep putting it off because it left such a bad taste in my mouth. And all the more so now going back and revisiting this story and seeing just that natural evolution and elevation of the character. And look, it's one of these things. I've talked about this over the years. given when I came up in comics, for me, it's like my Green Lantern was Kyle, my Flash was Wally, my Green Arrow was Connor. I loved all three of those legacy characters. Each one came at the expense of their predecessor, and the predecessors would all return in time, for better or worse, but for better, I would say overall. But here I thought was this great opportunity to bring up a former sidekick, to have this element of legacy, but not do it at the expense of Oliver Queen, for example. And yeah, to your point, you find out that he was the one behind that costume, even though he didn't want Roy to know, and he didn't want to be there because he wanted to give him his space. So I really appreciated that. It's like, it just felt like the most organic thing in the world. And also one of those things that doesn't happen all that often in comics, where you had that. So yes, for them to undo it as horrifically as they did for Roy Harper a few years later, was absolutely frustrating. So yeah, I couldn't shake that as I was looking at this. But in the vacuum of the Meltzer BENES run, I really loved to see Roy take on the mantle of Red Arrow. And what we'll see later on in the run is this romance of sorts between Roy and Kendra, between Red Arrow and Hawkgirl. And it's one of those things, we know obviously Green Arrow and Hawkman, Ollie and Carter, have this tension, this beef between them, and opposing ideologies that goes back years. So it's like there's this clear history between an Arrow and a Hawk that's been characterized and spun very differently between those original characters. And so now here it's like we still have an Arrow and a Hawk, but it's going to take a very different track. So I really appreciated, once again, mining the history, spinning it in a new way.
Yeah, it rhymes, it rhymes in a way that makes sense and that rewards people who have been around for a while to see that kind of reverse dynamic, while also adding a little bit of a different relationship into the fold. I was really happy to see that this is something that's taken. It's just like it hit a switch track and it's moving in a different direction in a way that I think is interesting and additive to everything else that's going on, especially if you're going to make a statement about a DC universe that is maybe a little bit kinder than it was the year before. Then having this kind of burgeoning relationship on the team that comes out in a very organic and positive way, I was really charmed by that, and I was hoping it would lead to much more than it did.
Yeah, but just something that I was thinking as I was reading it. So at this point in the story now, we have the previous contingent we talked about who are going to trace the Starro signal to that hideout in the Rockies. And now we have Dinah, Hal, and Roy who are going to track the signal in the Red Tornado android also to that same hideout. And I guess we can circle back to Reddy himself, aka John Smith. I mean, like I said, I think the setup for this, the fact that he has this want to be human, right? To feel, to touch, to taste, to smell, all of that, really, it does resonate. I think I just wanted a little bit more. And like we're saying, I know there was a lot of ground to cover, a lot of characters to serve, a whole new iteration of the team to set up. So I get that. And certainly the moment where he shows up at home to his wife and daughter and they embrace, that packs a punch. And we do at least get a short sequence. It's at least there of him going through the bedtime routine and brushing teeth with his daughter and all of that. So it's not like there was nothing there. I think I just wanted, I guess, before you're going to pull the rug out from under him and have his hands start shaking and get pulled into this business and search for his android body, I think I just wanted a little more of kind of building up of that life before we take it away. So we get to the point where our heroes converge at this hideout. It was the former base of T.O. Morrow, right, now being used by Anthony Ivo, and our mystery villain who stands revealed as a smart and intelligent Solomon Grundy in a suit, no less, who's tired of dying. And so what we find out here is that there's a balance of 13 immortals. There can only be, and I guess there must be 13 on Earth at any given time. Solomon Grundy wants immortality because he doesn't want to die again and risk coming back stupid once more. Ivo, on the other hand, who had achieved immortality through a serum, I believe, wants to die. So everybody has their wants here, right? Grundy wants to live forever. Ivo wants to die. John Smith just wants to live as a man. And the idea is that Ivo is going to use the Red Tornado components, the android body, with the Amazo head, right, to create this suit essentially for Solomon Grundy to wear, to live in forever. Of course, before our heroes interrupt the process. Grundy, of course, was used by Meltzer in the Archer's Quest, so that was a nice, bit of connective tissue there to his prior work. I guess, what did you make of the reveal of Grundy and Grundy's plot?
I was a little underwhelmed, to be honest. I liked the idea that he had evolved into something new, but I was a little bit, I don't know. I'm not really sure why I was disappointed. I guess it was because I was expecting something a little more mind-blowing. Not that an intelligent Grundy is something that I predicted by any means, or was even anywhere close to predicting, but there was, I guess, just the level of Grundy as a villainous force in the DC universe seemed a little bit mismatched for the story that's bringing the Justice League back in a major way for the first time in years. Execution, though, I thought was generally pretty strong. In terms of stories that you tell with Grundy, this is certainly a very unique addition to his tapestry. So if you're going to have the license to do something that is a little bit different, and you want to do something different without necessarily relying on Justice League of Villains past, then sure, Grundy could be at that level if he did have a little bit more of a mind. So let's give it to him and see what happens with it. I don't know if they've done that before this point. I can't remember anything off the top of my head, but I feel like it must have happened at least once or twice.
Right?
But
probably at some point.
Yeah.
Similarly, I couldn't think of a specific instance. Yeah, it was fine to me. I guess, not to get so hung up on this, but though it's not explicitly said, I do think the idea is that Grundy arranged for Reddy to be placed in a failing body, right? Like the fact that it's shaking and everything. Part of me is like, but why? I mean, because I know, yes, he is a villain, but it's like his whole quest at this point is just to live. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe I don't need more reasoning as, he's a bad guy and this is what he did, but I don't know. It was just kind of odd to kind of put Reddy in that specific position.
You know what I wonder? I wonder if it was a conscious choice on Meltzer's part, coming off of a story like Identity Crisis, where he's clearly at a high level of recognition among the DC fandom for creating pretty deeply entwined motivations for the villains. That story, like, everybody has a reason for what they're doing that you could trace, whether it's canonically or whether it's stakes that are just set up within that story specifically. It's written very succinctly in that respect. So being able to tell a comic book story that's a little bit more loose when it comes to the villainous motivations, I wonder if that was part of the equation. I don't know for sure, but it does feel very different from Identity Crisis in that respect. In addition to this story being a lot lighter generally, it also feels like it might be designed not to have as much specificity on that side of things.
Okay. Honestly, I could get on board with that, with that reading of it. So we ultimately end up with this battle between Amazo / the Red Tornado body versus the Justice League. They're trying to protect Kathy, Red Tornado's wife. But Red Tornado gets held back by Grundy. And it's this vicious battle. I mean, a truly horrific image from this is Grundy ripping off Red Tornado's arm and eating it. I guess once you see him do that, it's like, well, maybe it's not so hard to buy that he would set Red Tornado up to fail to begin with. I guess it all tracks.
He knew he was going to be getting the tornado wing later, so it made it all worth it.
And so at this point in the battle, when Reddy has put on one of these gauntlets, because another bit that I skipped over is that there's this whole army of red tornadoes of different colors that the Leaguers have to fight. And so Reddy is able to take one of the remnants and put the gauntlets on and give himself a little bit of a leg up, but Grundy is able to destroy those. And there is this really powerful moment where Red Tornado via narration is saying, like, I barely even felt the breaking of the gauntlets, but what happens next? Like, I'll feel that forever. And so I think that brutality of that battle between them, that's probably throughout this whole story where I felt the most for Red Tornado and really felt for him in that moment. and the way he's ultimately able to prevail over Grundy by kicking up his tornado power to the max. And just like a tree in a storm, he's able to literally rip Grundy in half, split him in half with these wins. So that, I thought, not unlike the Deathstroke battle in Identity Crisis, I think this is another very effective Meltzer penned battle.
Absolutely. I really love the entire moment. And what you said when it comes to his internal monologue, it's just, it really gives you a greater sense of his constitution that you would not have otherwise. If he didn't have this experience in an organic body and he is given, new firsthand data about what it is to embody a human body and feel the things that it can feel and overcome the challenges that people have to deal with when it comes to just the functioning of, they need a lot of things to function in order for everything to go well, right? And he has that context. And despite I guess not having the quasi creature comfort of not having a human body, he still manages to persevere. And I think it says a lot about him. His perseverance is very inspirational, despite, now having the limitations that come with humanity. But I think I might also been primed for this kind of conversation with a character like Red Tornado just because of a lot of storytelling I observe in other places. There are no shortage of fascinating stories in the Star Trek universe, for instance, for Data, a character in the Next Generation. He's an android. His whole mode of operation, one of the things that he aspires to be is more human. What does that mean? It's left ambiguous at the beginning of that show, and as time goes on, he encounters a lot of different elements of humanity, whether it's emotion, whether it's physical characteristics, dreaming for the first time. Like it's a really beautiful character to watch evolve over the course of the show and the films. So introducing some of that into a superhero that it's perfect for made me go, oh yeah, this is great territory to go a little bit deeper on, especially after this new maturation of comics over the previous decade. We're ready for this. Let's give Red Tornado the Data treatment and see where it goes. And unfortunately, it just didn't last very long.
Yeah, unfortunately. And he ends up once again back in his android body with a cold metal touch as Kathy is there to greet him. And yeah, you feel for them. Again, I don't mean to belabor the point. I wanted to feel even more for them, but I thought, nevertheless, the book made the point about. I think the other thing, too, is that coming out of this story, not that I was expecting the rest of the run to be Red Tornado heavy, but I was kind of thinking that we would get more of the fallout, more of the emotional fallout. And it's not that Meltzer doesn't touch on Red Tornado again. There are moments, but I don't know. I think I was looking for maybe a bit more in the follow-up here as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, considering again, his name is on the title of the initial story for the book, that seems to create a level of expectation that he's going to be a little bit more of an important part of it, especially considering the role that the Trinity played. It seems like they provided already initially in the Zero issue and in the first arc, really, the sense of institution that the Justice League is supposed to have combined with a sense of family. So that would conceivably give you more room to explore these other characters. And arguably, they didn't really capitalize on that as much as they could have. I would argue the crossover played no small part in that. But I not that I'm complaining about what's there. I think what is there and the sort of more humanistic journeys that we go on with some of these previously less prominent characters was well worth it, and it's very well executed over the course of these issues. But it's still a pretty crowded book, all things considered, whether you're talking about the amount of characters on the screen at any given time, on the page at any given time, or just the amount of threads that the narrative is playing with between plot and character. It's a packed book. So if something had to give, it's a shame that it's this, because like we got more time with Geoforce later. If we had devoted Geoforce's real estate in the initial arc more to Red Tornado, would it have lost anything? Not really. Like, I get Brad Meltzer loves Geoforce. He did some cool stuff with Geoforce, but let's balance it maybe a little bit more in Reddy's favor.
Dude, I would have gladly sacrificed that Geoforce subplot where his powers are wonky for more with Red Tornado. Yeah, Geoforce has never done anything for me. I appreciate Meltzer's passion for the character. For anyone who loves Geoforce, that's great. That's not a character who's ever spoken to me. I got more mileage out of Vixen. I didn't mention her too much here. We mentioned how her totem had been stolen, and then she gets lost to the animal world, but she's able to pull herself together and dive like a hawk and smash through Amazo at a clutch moment. And so as we come out of the tornado's path, we are left with the team that formed from this adventure, and not the first time that the league had formed in that way. So there's something really nice about honoring that tradition. And like we're saying, this idea that the league is such a big idea that can't be voted on necessarily the way that the Trinity was planning on putting the team together. And so we end up with the Trinity, Black Canary, Hal Jordan, Roy Harper now as Red Arrow, like we said, Vixen, Black Lightning, Hawkgirl, and Red Tornado, and ultimately Geoforce as well. So that's our lineup. I mean, overall, I think I felt this at the time and I feel it now, even though my heart is always with the big seven, the pantheon of the DC universe. I think this was a good balance where you do have a good number of those DC icons, but with some of the characters who don't always get as much play, who don't have their solo books. So maybe you could do a little bit more with them and really drill down on those interpersonal dynamics. So I always found this to be kind of a nice balance in terms of the lineup.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that you have a really strong foundation with the three who need to be there. You can't argue. I don't think anyway, you can sufficiently argue their lack of involvement on a Justice League team. And then you stack the rest of the roster with people who maybe aren't at Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman's level, but who unabashedly deserve to be there. And that's Black Canary, like she absolutely deserves a place on that team. And I was delighted to see the fact that she had ascended there, especially with how they decide to include her further in the infrastructure of the team. And then, filling it out with former lower level league members like Vixen, because I think she was Justice League Detroit, if I'm remembering correctly, first anyway. And then you have two Outsiders alums, and as someone who has liked the Outsiders for a long time, I was happy to see them involved. But like you, I mean, it's not like I was banging down the doors for a new Geoforce ongoing, but his presence on a team, sure, why not? And if your writer likes him, then go for it. I don't know if I feel any more strongly about Geoforce now, having read these stories, and with a DCU Last Will and Testament, also written by Meltzer, had a big Geoforce element to it as well around Final Crisis. But there was something that was just permeating the team books at this specific moment, because of course the third volume of Johns' JSA came out, or I guess it was volume 3 of Justice Society of America. It was Johns' third leg of his run. And the first issue in that series did a very good job of building up the importance of the institution and how it differs from the Justice League. So they were clearly, with these top level team books, trying to restore a sense of institutionalism that I think had kind of been lost, or that maybe didn't even have the sense of grandeur that people like Johns and Meltzer wanted to give to them. So having a team that's representative of past, present, and arguably future makes perfect sense. I think all of these characters are likable, and in the best cases, you can recruit a lot more fans to them. So yeah, I'm really happy with this roster, and I think it ends up, in hindsight too, being a pretty unique moment in time.
Yes, very much so. And, as much as I love that prior JLA title, to put it in context, you had the Morrison run, the Wade run, and then the Joe Kelly run. But Kelly leaves right around issue 90. And then you've got almost 30 issues, or approximately, of rotating creative teams. And in my estimation, they were hit or miss. Some were better than others, but it definitely wasn't a clearly defined era of the title or the team by design. But I do think it lost a bit of its luster, that title, by that final stretch. And so
it became more routine. That was the
Yes.
problem. By having decent creative teams, but certainly not the hardest hitters at DC Comics at the time, it loses a sense of prestige and gains a sense of routine, where some people might want to read it more out of obligation than by actually being legitimately excited for the level of this Justice League book. Although, like, the Johns Heinberg stuff is a little bit of an outlier to me, but for the most part,
Right.
yeah, it's just the identity of those final issues are certainly not distinct.
Yeah, well, like with Johns and Heinberg, the Crisis of Conscience arc. So there you're following up on Identity Crisis. Like, yes, that felt like, okay, we are really dialed into what's going on this moment in the DC universe. Yeah, the other arcs, unfortunately, not as much. So yeah, I think this was a return to form in a number of ways. I talk about Smallville a lot, but when it comes to listening, one podcast is at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And while their series rewatch has concluded, the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows on the Always Hold On To network. I'm a parent, which means that a family-friendly comic shop is a must, and there's none better than Aw Yeah Comics. Visit one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. Follow them on social media and at awyeahcomics.com for news about signings, live sales, and much more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah.
We're back, baby.
Who's back?
The Legion of Superheroes is back. It's taken a while, but DC's oldest super team is back.
Everything's different, but everything's the same. Does that make sense?
Kinda.
It's going to take a lot of work to bring fans up to speed and let them know all about the Legion.
That's what the Long Live the Legion podcast is for. Every episode, we break down the characters, the stories, and the different versions of the team.
So whether this is your first time reading the Legion,
or you've been reading them for a while,
check out the Long Live the Legion podcast, hosted by us, Jim
and Jay. We'll help you get to know the team a little bit better.
We also now here at the conclusion of this arc have the debut of the Earthbound Hall of Justice, which also contains a secret pathway to a new satellite in space. So we get the best of both worlds here, I think, in terms of the headquarters. And I'm sure as a Super Friends fan, you were happy to see that Hall of Justice.
I was, yeah. There was something. I guess I feel kind of strongly that the Justice League should be based on Earth too. Like I feel like it's important to to literally be on the planet that you're aiming to protect. There's something that's a little overlordish to me about the satellite, but considering the relevance of that over the past several decades now, and you have Batman's well-documented paranoia, it makes sense that that the League would want to have that kind of a perspective over the planet. But having both felt like the best of both, where you can have that presence, and they even allude to a public presence for the Hall of Justice, which is a little unusual. It felt like an embracing of the world in a way that just being isolated above the Earth. Yeah, you get some great vistas of it, but there's a difference between looking at Earth and being with people on Earth, you know?
Yeah, they're going to give tours of the hall. So, yeah, I like that. And we have a cameo of sorts. You don't actually see him, but Snapper is the one who takes the new group photo of the League. So, yeah, I mean, that's Tornado's Path. Anything else you want to say about that arc specifically before we tackle the back half of the run here?
If you haven't read it, I just encourage you to read it. It is like I said before, it's a unique moment in Justice League history, you know, in a time where the roster has been dominated by the heaviest hitters really since the New 52. Not that there have been uncreative rosters of the Justice League in that time, but for the most part, it's defined by the core 7, and maybe it should be. You know, I love all those 7 characters with reckless abandon, so maybe that's exactly what it should be. But there is something that is undoubtedly fun and engaging in any team book, whether you're talking about the Justice League, the Titans, the Suicide Squad, you're talking about the Avengers, you're talking about the X-Men. I mean, the X-Men maybe is a category unto itself, but still, there is something you can do about elevating different characters to different positions of prominence And the most efficient way to do that with readers is through a high profile team book. So I just like how varied everybody is. And still, though, you don't lose the sense of the beating heart from the Trinity, and particularly from Superman. You know, the Trinity dynamic would not be what it is without him at the center of it.
I was going to ask this at the end, but let me ask it now. So I know we already addressed the very unfortunate road they take Roy Harper down. I'm just thinking about the rest of the series after Meltzer leaves. Now, full disclosure, I've not read the entire series. I know Dwayne McDuffie was on the book for a while. I know ultimately James Robinson will come on and finish it out. There's an interim period though, right? It's not just those two writers. Am I correct?
I think there's a couple of other one-offs that come out, but for the most part, it is Dwayne McDuffie. And I think he was 14 through 30. In fact, I'm going to look it up right now because it's dissatisfying to me that I don't know.
All right. Well, while you're looking it up, I guess what I would say is that I do remember attempting to continue with this series after the Meltzer run and not enjoying it enough to do so. And like I said, I did check back in at least briefly when James Robinson took over, and there too, it didn't grab me. At some point over the course of doing this podcast, because there's a lot more that I still want to do on the Justice League front. I think I will circle back around to the rest of the series, but I guess my point and my question is, like, I wonder whether, and not to put down the creators that followed, but like, I wonder whether the rest of this series that continued up until the New 52 reboot kind of delivered on the promise of this initial run. And I'm curious how you feel about that.
Yeah, it's something that I've thought about a lot. Just for the record, before I continue though, Len Wein did a single backup issue, but for the most part, it was defined by those writers.
Okay.
Oh man, I could say so much. Like, I love Dwayne McDuffie, and it was horrible that we lost him far too soon. It made a lot of sense that they went to him right after this, but by the time you got to James Robinson, not only did you have the cry for justice and the fallout from that, but it was also a time when the DC universe did not have Bruce Wayne. So you extracted that element of the team's identity. Superman had grown apart from the League at that time. And it was just unfortunate that the roster was kind of forced into a bad place. But it did feel like the book maybe started to fall into a sense of routine. I don't feel like that's the book James Robinson wanted to write if he had the Justice League, which was a recurring theme from his time at DC during this era in particular. But it's ultimately a bit of a mixed bag, although there's certainly a lot of highlights from people like Dwayne McDuffie.
Yeah, fair enough. And like I said, I can't pass full judgment because I haven't read all of it, but that's a little bit of my experience and my impression. And yeah, I think about it because when I consider the various eras of the Justice League, this post-Infinite Crisis period, it's there, but I don't know how kind of firmly defined I view it compared to, for example, the Big Seven or like the New 52 or the Unlimited era that we're in right now.
Yeah, it loses a distinct sense of identity, I think. The issues that we're talking about are probably the most prominent in that series, and arguably for good reason. You know, there was something, I think, that was maybe just a little episodic by the time Meltzer left the title, and DC was relying on more disparate event series at this time. Green Lantern started getting really popular, so you're naturally going to align the economic engine behind a book like that has a lot of momentum behind it, that would continue to have momentum behind it for years afterward. That might have pushed this book off to the side a little bit in terms of the importance of the wider DCU. I mean, there were Blackest Night tie-ins in Justice League, so that should tell you something. But yes, the New 52 does feel more distinct. I think a lot of that is because the roster was very stable, really, until you started to get to the final third of the run, when you started introducing like Captain Cold and Lex Luthor into the mix. And then stuff since then, and even before then, I think it goes back to what we were saying about the book generally. You know, there were these more distinct eras where it seemed like DC was giving time, attention, and resources to making this the book you need to read to keep up with the DC universe. And when you lose that, and when the book loses that, it becomes less of a distinct reading experience. I think there is just something about Justice League, an era at DC where Justice League is the primary book that's driving the narrative engine of the shared universe. You can feel it get less prominent when it's Green Lantern leading to Blackest Night, for instance, or Batman leading to, maybe a bad example among you and I, but Dark Knight's death metal or metal, right? It's just like Batman's the thing that leads into those, and Justice League is a little less distinct. Maybe death metal less so, but metal probably. Like who really reveres the DC Rebirth era of Justice League? I don't know very many people that do. No shade on the stories, but I just don't.
Same here. No, but that's a good point about sort of what's driving, what's leading the charge at DC. So, as always, I welcome audience input. Like if there are folks out there for whom this Justice League series and era really loom very large for you in your fandom, I would love to hear that perspective. So the next story here is this crossover with the Justice Society of America series written by Jeff Johns. It's the Lightning Saga. Now, this was part of what we refer to as the Jeff Johns Legion trilogy that also included Superman and the Legion of Superheroes in Action Comics with Gary Frank, and then ultimately the Final Crisis Legion of Three Worlds miniseries with George Perez. And you and I did an entire epic, awesome episode about this a while back. So if anyone wants kind of the full dive into the Legion side of things, I encourage them to check it out. I did reread the Lightning Saga for this, and just in terms of quick setup, like we mentioned, you have Trident, who's apprehended in the Tornado's path. He's got the Starro attached to him. And when Batman is examining him later and running the fingerprints through all of the databases he has access to, he gets a hit from the Fortress of Solitude records. And quote unquote Trident is identified as Karate Kid from the 31st century. And there's a very natural connection point to the Justice Society because one of their new members is Starman, who's schizophrenic and lives at a mental institution and claims to be from the 31st century. And long story short, what you find out is that they are 2 of 7 time-displaced members of the Legion of Superheroes who were sent back on a secret mission. And Starman has his own mental health issues, but for the rest of them, they had all employed these mental blocks to prevent the other Legionnaires from knowing what they were doing because they would try to stop them. But between those blocks and just the difficulties of time travel, they're very out of sorts and their memories are out of whack when they're here in the present. And so we have the League and the Society tracking down these members and trying to figure out what they're up to. And Superman naturally is able to glean and theorize that they're there to perform this lightning ritual, where these members each hold up a lightning rod and one can sacrifice their life to bring back a fallen member. And this was something that they had done in the past when Lightning Lad had been lost. And now they're here seemingly to do it again. And as we get to the climax of the story, it seems to some of our characters and to the audience that perhaps Barry Allen is their targeted resurrection. Instead, it ends up being Wally West and his family who had disappeared during Infinite Crisis. And then the twist at the end of the story, as most of the Legionnaires return to the future, is that there's actually someone else that they were after who they got. And we'll find out in Legion of Three Worlds that it was Bart Allen, and that's where he makes his return. So that's really the Legion piece of it. I guess in looking at it again, was there anything new that jumped out to you generally? And I guess specifically in terms of the Justice League and this team up with the Society, anything that you want to share?
Really the thing that kind of jumps out at me, even though it is so Legion centric, it feels like another welcome return by introducing what is arguably another essential ingredient for the Justice League. And I think that is the Flash. Got a little bit of lip service for Bart in the Zero issue, either in Zero or number 1, where they put out a picture of the Flash. They don't know who the picture is. Batman just says it's a placeholder image. We need to have a Flash. I think Bart is ready. Like, wait, does he have his powers? And I don't know. I can't remember if he had actually re-exhibited his powers in his number 1 ongoing issue from 2006 at this time yet. But Batman just answers, he's got his powers. And it's like a little bit of a peek behind the curtain there. But I liked the lip service that was given to Bart being ready and the kinds of things that he had overcome. Now, granted, in hindsight, you could say that maybe they were trying to mature Bart a little bit too much at this time. And I don't disagree with that. But I just appreciated that there was a recognition at the beginning of the importance of the Flash and coming into the fold. And then seeing Wally again, even though for me it was a little bit of a misdirect, because I was sure it was going to be Barry. But that we wouldn't have to wait long for that either.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
Just in terms of the Lightning Saga that we didn't talk about before, I do think it's just like the welcome return of the Flash. I do think that that's important. As far as the dynamic of the team in relation to like the JSA, like I said before, the first issues of both of these series did a really effective job of illustrating the different kinds of importance that they each have to the wider makeup of the DC universe. So the Justice League, the JSA kind of characterizes it as a little less like a family, more like a strike force, whereas the JSA is past, present, future, and is unabashedly a family. Meltzer takes a little bit of a different tact in trying to illustrate the importance of the League as a collective unit, because there is a sense of family, but there's also just something that feels deeper than even family between the Trinity. At least to me, that's what comes across. So there's this maybe higher institutional calling that the Justice League has. But when you put both teams side by side, you don't feel, I don't think at least, a very different or alien dichotomy or even just dynamic between both teams. They both seem to settle in with each other really, really well. And they all seem to like each other to varying degrees. And, it's always fun to see Batman and Power Girl talk about the kinds of things the books that she's collecting, and Batman trying to buy it and her saying no. But it's two sides of the familial coin. But Justice League arguably pushes that a little bit further by having that deeply embedded relationship between the Trinity.
Yes. And I'm sure I said this when we did our last episode, but I guess my biggest takeaway on the team side of it is just, I love this tradition of them getting together and learning from each other and training. We have a group of them playing Capture the Flag. You've got Mr. Terrific playing chess against Black Canary and Hal Jordan, although then it turns out he was really playing them against each other. Batman conducting his investigation with members of the society. And it's one of those things I so wish, I know in pre-crisis territory we had the various team ups, that was an annual tradition, but I wish in the modern era this had stuck, because we got instances of it. The JLA JSA Virtue and Vice original graphic novel illustrated by the late great Carlos Pacheco. I love that. There was, I think, the Thanksgiving issue of JSA that featured the teams coming together. We have this. Maybe there are more that I'm blanking off the top of my head, but to my memory, like, this didn't become as ongoing a tradition as I would have liked to, because I love seeing those personalities come together. That was, I think, my biggest takeaway. I liked it. I just wanted more.
Yeah, I mean, and you could also even, like, it certainly it can't be structured the same way, but there was a reason pre-crisis why a JLA JSA crossover would be a big deal. It's like a cornerstone event in the DC universe when you had a Crisis on Multiple Earths. And how many times did that reoccur? It reoccurred a lot, because it's a major creative signpost for this kind of storytelling. And I felt that for the Lightning Saga. You had I think a lot of it is due to the strength of the creative teams, and certainly the name recognition of the creative teams. That elevates this event pretty significantly. But in terms of storytelling quality, they do a good job of keeping character at the forefront. Like, plot is arguably a little bit complicated when you really drill down into the Lightning Saga, but it doesn't feel nearly as complicated as the plot would suggest because of the strength of the character work, I think.
Yeah, and you have groups from both teams splintering off into subgroups to track down each of these, and you end up with a bit of a tour across the DCU. You go to Gorilla City, you go to the Fortress, you go to Thanagar. So I think that helps. And I mean, at the end of the day, yes, it does get a bit complex when we get into more of the Legion lore, but the notion of these time-displaced members that the League and the Society are tracking down, I think that's that's relatively accessible for folks. So if you want more on the Lightning Saga, make sure, and I'll put the link in the show notes, make sure you go back to the episode that Chris and I did a while back. But that now leaves 2 standalone stories to close out this run. Walls, which is illustrated by Gene Ha and features Roy and Mari Vixen trapped in this rubble, in this building that's been thrown into the water, essentially. And I mean, I think this is one that's heralded as a standout, right? I mean, that's sort of my impression of its legacy.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I think I'll have to, there's something else that I used to know right off the top of my head, but I don't anymore. But I think this won best single issue at the Eisners the year that it came out. And it's hard to get more validation, certainly from your peers, than that. But this, as a reading experience, it communicated harrowing emotions so effectively. And pairing Gene Ha for this particular issue was a pretty big masterstroke in my estimation, just because he plays with the claustrophobia of the scenario so effectively. And you really feel the literal and metaphorical weight that's on these people, in a way that I think really dials you into the drama of the moment, certainly, but it also just acquaints you more with characters that are so eminently likable. You know, they each bring different elements to this scenario. And, but I just really appreciate the message that this issue sends in particular about the ethos of the Justice League. You know, it is kind of a simple idea, strength in numbers, but having that backup of your peers on multiple levels, people who can understand you because they're in the same line of work as you are, is a very unique line of work. This issue really does emphasize that in a way that I find pretty beautiful, actually. As harrowing as the initial reading experience was, and I was hanging on my seat at every page when I was reading this in the shop when it came out. It's a beautiful story in the way that it ultimately resolves, but also just aesthetically, it's one of the most beautiful single issue comic books I have ever read. I am a big, big fan of Gene Ha's work here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest compliment is just I felt like I was in that rubble with them. You know, you really do feel that sense of claustrophobia, because I don't know that this one loomed too large for me personally, just kind of when I think about this run. And so I didn't really have much in the way of expectation as I was going back in for the reread here. And yeah, I really was struck by that and really felt like I was in that harrowing situation with them. And yeah, I mean, the art, the size of the panels, the placement of the panels, the coloring, I mean, all of it really, really had a tremendous effect. And you feel their fear, their disorientation. I mean, they don't know where the other one is. It turns out they're like right across from each other, but it takes them a minute to gather that. And we also get the revelation here that Vixen's powers aren't working normally. So they're really, they're really limited here to just their wits and their heart. And yeah, thankfully, obviously they, they make it out. They realize they're essentially upside down. So they were going the wrong direction. But yeah, it pulled you into it in a really, really visceral way, like very, very effective. It's one of these things I like to think we've done a good job of describing it, but like, this is one of those stories is like, you must take a look at it for yourself.
Oh, completely. And I did look it up. It did win the Eisner Award for Best Single Issue in 2008. Right. So I think Darwin Cook had won both years before that point Jeff Loeb and Darwin Cook for Batman the Spirit.
Gotcha.
And then I think Solo, Darwin Cook took an award home for Solo. But no, it's just, there is such a sense of peril that is communicated over the course of these pages that feels almost tactile because of, the jagged pipes that are sticking out from the ground that they're in, or just like feeling the weight. And I think the emotional expressiveness of the faces is a critical factor when it comes to looking at these pages. I was totally on board when I remember hearing when it was nominated, actually, when I was nominated for this Eisner, and just thinking, oh yeah, totally. That makes perfect sense. And I was really happy to see when it won. But yeah, I think this is a standout issue here. And oftentimes that's kind of what happens. These lesser known characters fuel something in the creative engine of these writers and artists to maybe take some bigger swings than they might feel they are able to take with some of the bigger, more prominent toys in the toy box. This is something that is all about what the Justice League is supposed to represent and how they're supposed to be there for each other. And it doesn't even include its marquee members. I think that's a pretty strong track record.
Yeah. And it's like, you don't get the setup for this. You don't get an epilogue. We're just in this moment with them.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's something really, really powerful, really effective about that. And also just how grounded essentially it is. Like, they're not floating in space or being pulled through a portal into another dimension. It's like they're in rubble and the weight is crushing them. Roy's got glass in his neck and they're running out of air, and the clock is ticking. And so I think really grounding it in that way. And there's something about it where, and maybe Roy even says something to this effect, but it's like, out of all of the ways that you think they might go, you wouldn't necessarily expect this, but it goes to show the unpredictability of life for anyone, including especially members of the superhero community. So yeah, that's a really strong one. And obviously one that you can absolutely just read in a vacuum. As much as I think we would recommend this entire run, but you could just parachute right into this issue and I think get a really, really satisfying ride.
You know what it makes me think of? Another set of stories that you and I talked about, the Justice Doom War that led up to Death Metal in Justice League, because there is something about reading the moment where Superman gets sucked into a vortex in an alternate dimension without access to sunlight and really just floating in a void. And the level of physical reality that was given to that, I found those moments pretty unsettling and effectively communicated that they were supposed to be unsettling, you know? However, when you compare something like that, which was generally pretty creatively effective, to something that is, you know, literally in the ground, it's hard to get more grounded than that. But it's also grounded in the visual language and the tactile language of what it feels like to have dirt over you. I mean, chances are you might have felt that at least a little bit. There's something that's more inherently relatable that makes it more terrifying. If it's in terms that we understand and that we can clearly see and attach to some sort of feeling of something that we know in our own world, this one does a really effective job. And that alternate universe vortex had Superman in it, and we're talking about just rubble with Red Arrow and Vixen. It's very effective.
Absolutely. And then we close it out with monitor duty here, where, as the title suggests, we follow each leaguer as they relieve their predecessor and take over the monitor duty. I guess here we get a good bit of follow up with Red Tornado, where it seems like he is a bit withdrawn from his home life and is jumping into this monitor duty and has business in the lab to conduct. Like, he doesn't necessarily seem to be in a rush to get back home. So I guess, you know, again, unfortunate emotional fallout from what he's been through. We also have, I believe it's Red Tornado, who catches Roy and Kendra in the act in the quarters. So we see that relationship developing. But throughout the proceedings, you have these unseen figures until the end who are watching and commenting, right, as they're observing. And we find out it's Aquaman and Martian Manhunter, one of those other subgroups, and two characters. I mean, it's funny because with Martian Manhunter, I feel like he's always talked about as like, he's the one constant. He's always part of the League. I mean, he wasn't here, at least at the outset. And, you know, and they talk about that they're not part of this exact configuration. But yeah, I kind of liked how it tied into that larger idea of these subgroups that formed, and to have these two iconic characters who have had long histories with the League still represented here. How did all of this play for you?
Well, I have to unfortunately get a little pedantic about the moment with Aquaman and the Martian Manhunter, because in terms of what was going on in Aquaman at the time, made absolutely no friggin' sense whatsoever.
Wait, so where was Aquaman at this point in time?
So actual Aquaman, Arthur Curry, was mutated into the Dweller of the Depths and was a little bit more of like a wizard that didn't look anything, and he didn't even remember who he was. And this was era that we had Arthur Joseph Curry, who's a different guy.
Okay, I
with a
remember this
backstory.
now. Okay.
Yeah. So, if memory serves, in fact, I have the page open right now. Looking closely, yes, that is the design of Arthur Joseph Curry because his hair is longer and you see another little accoutrement tied to his costume that the Aquaman we know did not have at that time. So I was hung up on that. I was like, I want to know when are we actually getting Aquaman back? Because I was one of those people who was like, I would like Aquaman back, especially after everything that happened with Sub Diego and everything leading up to Infinite Crisis. And so I was actually pretty hungry for Aquaman information, and this didn't make any damn sense. So I was a little distracted by that. I am someone who does love the character of Aquaman. Now Martian Manhunter, yeah, it makes perfect sense. And in any other era than this one, it would have made sense for Aquaman too. But that could not have been Orin at the time. So, but collected editions outlast the particulars of continuity. In terms of the importance of those two figures being there, not debatable. I think that their inclusion makes a lot of sense. No one is going to remember all the weird stuff that was going on. In fact, people who work in comic shops barely remember that era of Aquaman. So I don't mean to dispute that it makes perfect sense and serves an important purpose, especially that they're not on the team. But in the moment, I was a little distracted.
Look, this was one that flew right by me. I'm no Aquaman aficionado, but I can appreciate where you're coming from on this because there have been plenty of things where I'm like, oh, but this doesn't line up. It's not consistent. Sure. So I appreciate the passion. I get it. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Yes, if you're just ignorant like I was of this, or yeah, you just you read this in a vacuum. You come to it years later. All of that context of what was going on just kind of falls away, and what you have left is what you have here. And maybe that was part of the motivation. There was a sense of like, well, kind of going with the default iteration here.
It's a really nice finale. We talked about rhyming earlier. It rhymes with the Zero issue in a way that I find really satisfying. Even if you read those two issues in isolation, I think you'd get a story that generally does make sense, especially if you just focus it on the core Trinity. So I appreciated that Meltzer's goodbye to the title was very similar to his entrance to the title. And it's just a nice read. That sense of relief that I felt when the book was solicited was fulfilled by this finale. Like it felt good to have the Justice League on watch. I feel like Brad Meltzer did an effective job justifying the roster for the most part. So it's easy for me to go on journeys with these people and see them as legitimate members of the Justice League. But I do kind of feel like we should have gotten a little bit more out of this run than we did. A calendar year is a long time. I can't dispute that, but we only got really 3 stories out of it. And it feels in that respect, maybe a little bit thin, although, this hardcover is reasonably thick. I don't know why I feel like that. I just feel like there was more runway here, I guess.
And sometimes that gut feeling, right? It's undeniable whether or not we can make logical sense, but I don't disagree. I mean, overall, I had a good enough time. I enjoyed this reread. It's definitely a run that I have recommended and would continue to recommend to people. But yeah, like yourself, I think I did want to get something more out of it, especially upon this revisitation. And when you consider that out of 13 issues, 3 of them are devoted to a crossover. It is a really fun crossover, but that had its own agenda. And Walls is great, but that is 2 characters getting the spotlight. And then even here, Monitor Duty, you're cycling through the characters, and the commentary of our 2 observers is such a big driver of it, that at the end of the day, I really feel like, yeah, that Tornado's path, that's where really the meat of this run really falls. And yeah, there was a lot to accomplish there. So yeah, in terms of the run itself and kind of the legacy of or what became of the rest of the series, yeah, I think there's something that, it feels a little unfulfilled.
Part of it too, and I'd be curious about your perspective on this, but thinking back to the immediate instance of Wally's return and the aftermath of it, I really, really loved how Brad Meltzer wrote Wally in Identity Crisis. And I was hoping I'd get more of that. We didn't really get Meltzer using a roster that had Wally on it at all, but I feel like he is someone who is generally well suited to Wally if Identity Crisis is any indication. And that last Will and Testament issue, I believe he had a moment in there, but I think that's part of it. And considering how Wally's own title ended up going right after he came back, it's more of a footnote than anything else on the wider history of the character. Maybe if we had had a more prominent Brad Meltzer written Justice League with Wally on it, we'd have felt like we got more from Wally in the immediate sort of precedence to Final Crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things. I know he comes back at the end of Lightning Saga, so there's only a couple of issues left. But yeah, it definitely feels like, oh, wow, like I can't wait to see what happens next. Well, you're not going to see it here. So,
yeah.
But that was the Brad Meltzer, Ed Benes run on Justice League, now in its 20th year. So thank you so much for joining me. I really, I'm glad we took this opportunity to revisit it and talk about it. Always fun when we join forces. What would you like to share with folks about what you have going on in your podcasting corner?
Well, thanks again for the invitation. I really appreciate it. It's fun to talk about these stories in particular, and I'm glad to join you anytime. In terms of stuff going on, Discovery Debrief is on a little bit of a hiatus. This is my Star Trek podcast, but you can find recaps of every episode of Starfleet Academy Season 1 if you're so interested in the perspectives of 4 longtime franchise fans taking a look at every fresh instance of the franchise. Over on the Comic Binge, which you can find on YouTube, our subseries Knights Never Die, which is going through Grant Morrison's Batman run issue by issue, is up to the first half of Batman R.I.P. So it's a very interesting and creative time for that run generally, and we're barreling forward into Final Crisis, and we're planning to cover that pretty thoroughly. And that's pretty much it. If you find me on social media at Chris Clow, ChrisClow, feel free to say hi. I don't spend a lot of time on there, but I'll always say hi to anybody who says hi to me.
Right on. Well, I hope everyone will check that out. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Keep coming back. And remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive content by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Rewards include our DCU spinoff podcast, advanced listens, sponsorship opportunities, and more. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please rate and review the podcast via your platform of choice, subscribe so that you never miss an episode, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to Lighting the Bat Signal, a Batman fan journey, which applies the signature Digging for Kryptonite approach to the Dark Knight, as well as another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now in its final year covering the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.